Let's get to the member specific segment. Let's talk about refreshing the player pool. Alfred, take it away.
Absolutely. I was so inspired by a previous segment on the pod that dealt with competition, and I find it that I have a fight within myself, something that has been brought up by the hobby, where that killer instinct or the competitive attitude wasn't built into me. I didn't grow up with a sporting kind of mindset, and certainly music, which is how I've made my ends for the majority of my life. Competition is a very funny thought.
Mm.
In some aspects, you do want to do better or well or show up on lists or be bought, but it isn't really the thing where it is exactly competitive with the person to the left or right of you. It's much more groupthink.
Yeah.
And there's certainly games for that. But generally speaking, our board game hobby is built on this idea that everybody at that table wants to win. And if anyone abdicates that role, you're missing something from the experience. There's just some aspect to which we all are poorer for it. And that kind of reminded me of this aspect to which there is a certain interest in keeping the hobby a little bit narrow and conservative in terms of who's at the table then, who's competing with us, who is to the left of us and who's to the right of us, and how much we want all of us to be kind of winning, so to speak.
Right.
Does that make sense? The competition aspect, just kind of take that metaphor a step further. And I really want to see everyone experience this hobby. And I think we're all evangelists for this. We know, maybe just because of the Game Brain podcast, I've been reminded that there is a game for everyone. I really believe that.
Oh yeah.
And, it may not be the heaviest Euro, it may not be all the things that the hottest newness that we talk about, but something in this mix is not Candyland, is not Monopoly, is something more elegant, more beautiful, less random and punitive, and much more built for that kind of competition. And just in that same way, I really believe there is a game for every kind of expression of personhood as well.
Sure.
I've never felt the need to kind of be a certain way among my gaming group. I feel very accepted by all of y'all, and I love that feeling of just being kind of pure in the competition. The kind of levers and pulleys that are available in an elegant rule system means that I don't have to be in my body. I don't have to have an embodied experience, right? It can be very much that heady space that is free from, let's say, gender in my case.
Sure.
Or free from a lot of these kind of personhood things that I've then also been allowed to be more free in myself. But I will say certain games push that button more than others. Certain games are less about being kind of reminded about who you are, and some games are harder to grok in that fashion. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But I want to. Can you give me a concrete example of what games are harder? Is it that there are games that put you more in that confront your personhood more, and there are games that do so less, or
That thing exactly. Yeah, that thing exactly. Something, and sometimes it has to do with things that have total arbitrary kind of quirks of each person's experience, and other things are just about like the aspect to which you are put into the kind of headspace of being a warlord or a king, or
interesting,
or a queen, or or much more rarely a queen, or much more
yeah.
rarely these kind of expressions of other aspirations. It's we're dealing in a world of competition, and oftentimes in a lot of games that competition expresses itself in the very base manner of I'm going to kill you. I am a soldier on a board. I am pushing this button, and I am doing that thing that's kind of and now obviously a lot of modern games get away from that, but a lot of these kind of ancient or the earlier games really explore that dynamic, right, of the kind of the fantasy aspect of
Well, yeah, I believe.
yeah.
I believe that before there was a Euro game hobby, there was a war game hobby, and the beginnings of hobby gaming was the standard was held by war gamers, and because of that, there's always going to be that aspect there, and for some people that's great and they're going to be able to access that well, and for others it's going to be a block, it's going to be a stopping point for them in some ways, right?
Potentially, right? And I think part of that has to do with the game space that is both implied in the games themselves and what ways we can I don't want to see the previous world modified. I want us to see the kind of possibility of opening up with what's coming, because we are about the new hotness, we're about the newness, and
Yep.
I love looking at the classic games and kind of seeing the ways to which they are have done so well and informed the future. But I am, maybe just by nature of being in our particular game group and always being buffeted by that new wave. I love the fact that we can see the iterations already happening, games that echo of previous games and kind of push things forward. And so part of this is, trying to make this kind of statement towards what has been, in terms of just like some of that difficulty I've had personally in finding myself in some of these older games, but way more esteeming the kind of possibilities that we see from what we all kind of regard as being great games, and how they can kind of center a lot of different representation, a lot of different language in gaming, and even just find all these different ways to explore that going forward. I love that, and I can see more and more people coming to the table for that reason. I can see more and more people at the conventions and kind of getting involved in the hobby, and even more importantly, getting involved in designing the games and pushing this forward. We're seeing an explosion, a renaissance. I think we all can attest to the renaissance that's happening in our hobby, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
never before has this been more popular. Never before has this been more possible. And so much of that is about a diversity of voices and a diversity of ways that shows up in the games.
100%, 100%. And yet yet growing pains, right? And yet
Yeah.
we're still being confronted by certain facts that our hobby is still largely male and largely white male, and that the designers are still, even though we are making strides each and every day, is still largely that way. And the saddest part of it is that I think that there are really three subsets of gamers that play games, right? There are the ones that want to expand this hobby and to bring in new players that don't necessarily look like me or think like me, and want to bring as many people into something that we found that is amazing as possible. And in order to do that, we recognize that we're going to have to change our experience to some degree in order to make a bigger tent for people, right? Then there are the ones that want to preserve the great thing that they have, and unfortunately these are two sets of people, right? Because there's one set that want to preserve what they have and do not value making the tent bigger, do not value bringing in new voices. They want to keep what they have the way they have it, and they're fine with if the cost of that is the hobby not growing and new faces and new people coming in.
And this is kind of where, and just if I may interject,
Sure, please.
this is kind of where I really want to put not blame on people, but I think that's anti-competition. And I'm not some some liberalist who wants to see free trade around the world necessarily, but I don't want to use this kind of loaded language, but it is that kind of case that when you stop expanding the circle, you are at essence saying you are kind of fine and happy with the limited competition outcomes that are available to you, and that's fine, and that at essence invites entropy. And so to kind of not to regard anyone's particular kind of needful beliefs about their individual experience, but just to say that competition, if this is really the centerpiece of what makes a good game, is everyone being able to compete, sometimes on equal footing or sometimes on unequal but interesting footing, as it has been talked about on the podcast before.
Yep.
That crux means that I think by its very definition, we need to invite everybody in. We need to have everybody at the table.
Correct. I totally agree. And yeah, to some degree, not wanting anything to change and trying to actively dissuade change in an economic game would be introducing a tariff, right? I'm going to create an arbitrary cost to new people coming in to this, and that arbitrary cost is that we speak to us and speak to ourselves, and we design games that only speak to us and to ourselves and not to you. But the third group of people that I was mentioning are people that do intellectually want new blood coming in. They want more women in the hobby. They want more, they want new faces, new ideas. They want to expand the hobby, but they haven't quite reconciled with the changes that need to happen for that to really flourish, right?
Yeah.
And that
You
to
know,
me
and,
is the
yeah.
most interesting group of people, because those are people that are ultimately the ones that are going to grow the hobby when they realize what needs to happen for that vision that they share uh, to happen, right?
Absolutely. And just from just to kind of back it up a little bit and look at some of the systemic things, you see, and I apologize, that one PAX game, the PAX technology game, oh gosh, what is it called?
Transhumanity.
Transhumanity is a perfect example of what I see to be one of this like stoppages in the arteries of our industry, of the hobby, right? Because
Yeah.
here's this game that is, has a lot of fun details to it. It does, all these PAX games have interesting little twists on the, but then just some thematic issues make it so that you are going to have people who, by its very definition of the kind of the way the game wants to proceed, it very willfully is kind of making light, making jest, making less of some people. And it's fully within reason that people can explore these spaces, but you can see just immediately how it leaves dents out. It becomes a source of a lightning rod rather than a kind of this kind of golden mean of what game can be.
Yes. Phil Eklund, the designer of that game, is a problematic figure within the context that we're describing right now. He has very, very strong beliefs and kind of designs them into the game. I think of him as kind of the D.W. Griffith of our hobby, right? Like, oh, a genius game, genius movie. I can't watch it ever again. That is just it is genius in the service of nothing, right, or in the service of less. And to some degree, that's listen. I love Phil Eklund's High Frontier because
Yeah.
it doesn't press any of those buttons. But when he gets into PAX Transhumanity, BIOS Origins is another game from that group, from that shop. And when I first was looking at it, first of all, I think it's kind of brilliant. I haven't played it yet, but I'm dying to. And one of the first developments you can make when you're trying to, basically you're taking early man and trying to make Homo sapiens, essentially, is what the game is, which sounds very problematic, and
Yeah.
and it likely is going to be, right? But one of the first developments was menopause, and I was like, menopause, first development. And I was like, oh boy, here we go. But then when I looked into it, it was really interesting because in the notes in the back, it was saying that actually menopause appears to be, from evolutionary biologists, an advantageous development whereby women could live, females of the species could live longer, and by living longer, transmit information, knowledge, care to the young ones. And that created an evolutionary advantage, so I thought it was going to be some big anti-woman thing, but actually it wasn't. Actually, it pulled me down a different rabbit hole, which I guess it's just a means of saying that I think that you're absolutely right. I think that his games have a lot of problems with them, even though I don't think in his heart that's his goal, right? I think there's
Well,
the well is I think the well is poisoned. I don't think he's purposely poisoning it.
I don't think we can't speak to someone's individual kind of output
Sure.
other than the fact that they have made some pretty strident statements. So we can speak to
Yeah.
what they've published and what
Yep.
they kind of said out loud. But I will say I would love to see that same diversity of voices continue both ways. Essentially, like we should be having conversations about those old games, the ways to which we can make them not less rough around the edges, but to really look at them for what their statements were and how we can upgrade that, update that, and just kind of, we're not just going to negate them. We're not going to take them off the shelves necessarily, but we're gonna deal with them as they sit. And as an industry, then I think we can make moves forward. And by having those conversations both about designers, publishers, and previous, we can just do better and even if we're not encountering this kind of, the endless group of both like advanced and people looking for the heaviest games and the less heaviest games, and that whole dimension, we can at least start to kind of make better of our previous history and kind of move it all forward.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the way I look at it is when I browse through my games, when I go through a list of the games that I have on my wall, I'm like, okay, that is a medieval era game about the princes in Florence. That one is a medieval era game about the princes in Germany. That one's a medieval game of the princes in, and at a certain point I'm like, look, I love all the games, but I don't the theme is not at all why I love any of those. There are so many, there's such an opportunity here. There are so many stories that are untold and undertold, and
Yeah.
those are specifically things that are going to speak to the kinds of people that we want to share this amazing hobby with, and we want to bring into the experience. And it doesn't take much, and I think that the richness of that storytelling, the richness of those themes and those settings and those perspectives are going to be just such a net positive. That's the way I do it.
And it's, yeah, representation is a huge part of that, but also, mechanics that then that also kind of regard and kind of offer possibilities. It's not just simply about, I think, having changing the kings for a different kind of king. It's also just kind of recognizing and occupying all the different outgrowths of way people compete, as we have often talked about all these different forms of competition,
Sure.
mechanics and mechanisms that also can have cooperative and I think there's this kind of movement towards we have a lot of knife fight games in our particular group, but there is a whole different kind of way of enjoying game that doesn't necessarily have as much of the shooty, blangy, bloodied aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And just finding more of those joys in heavier fashions and lighter fashions, finding all these different combinations of ways that these mechanisms and mechanics can come together is also going to bring a lot more people into the hobby, because it isn't just about immediately having a theme that then it's like, oh, I really enjoy this. Some people obviously are allergic to fantasy. Some people love it and kind of need these things, but that isn't just where it stops. It has to be in all aspects of what we're doing, and I think it's already happening. We're already seeing the huge growth of the industry happens to be because we are at the very verge of having all that come together. But I kind of can't wait for it to happen fast enough, because we love it here. This is our space.
Yeah.
And I adore the fact that I feel included and I feel recognized, because I have a game group that's just so, at the forefront of pushing these ideas. And I feel really proud of all of you in that way. And I feel really honored to be amongst y'all. It's great.
And us to you as well. I think that your competition comment in particular is a very interesting point that people said when Euros first started coming out, people that played the older, more warlike games and all that sort of stuff, that, oh, well, this is just multiplayer solitaire.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's not. How do we know? Because now we have multiplayer solitaire. And the people playing those games are people like me who are looking at why can't we just go back to a good old punch you in the nose game like Agricola, and which is exactly the game that people used to talk about having no competition, no interaction with people whatsoever. No, it's not true. It's not true. It's just not roll dice and murder people on the board. It is, oh, you took the wood that I wanted to take. It's a tremendously competitive thing. It just doesn't have certain other baggage on it, right? And
Exactly.
I think that for some people, the multiplayer solitaire is where they're going to live and thrive. They want to be doing a puzzle alongside somebody, not against somebody. And there's a lot of people that probably would be able to access our hobby if games were more like that. And so I'm glad that we do. I'm glad the roll and write movement has brought a lot of those people in, right? I think that's a great thing too.
Absolutely. All the different kinds of storytelling, all the different things that encapsulate competition as we recognize it increasingly as being this highly nuanced, diverse set of game. and we can embrace all of that and move it forward. And this is just, part of the segment is just a wish, but also just a recognition, a recognition that we're at this verge of just jumping off this beautiful cliff into unknown territory, unknown waters, and I love it.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Alfred. I thought that was a great topic. Something, a lot to think about, obviously.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, you very well might enjoy the other videos you now see being suggested to you on screen. Also, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could like, share, or subscribe to our Game Brain channel. Thanks so much.